Right, so good morning. Thank you for coming to today's webinar. We're going to be talking about business travel. I'm joined by Sarah and Charles from Vialto Partners, a recent joiner to the Chamber and specialists in global mobility. So they will be running through their slides today, giving us lots of information, and we really look forward to finding out more. If you have any questions, please do pop them in the Q&A box or the chat function, whatever you prefer. And yeah, let's kick off.
Super. Thank you very much, Rosie. Okay, so welcome to our very first session with the Chamber. So thank you very much for having us this morning. We're looking forward to our session, and comments, questions, feedback, all very welcome. This is the first one we've done, so tell us what you think. We would love to hear about it. So wanted to talk to you a bit about business travel. You might have thought a few years ago when COVID hit that was the end of business travel, but as you'll see from today, it's definitely on the rise again, and something very important for established businesses as well as new businesses that want to expand overseas for the first time. So we'll talk to you a little bit about that today. So a bit of an agenda. So just some introductions to Charles and myself, talk about some market insights, what we're seeing across the board, who we are, why it's important, why you want to take some action now, and let's see what solutions we can have to solve this problem of business travel, and also make it into an opportunity for business as well. So my name's Sarah O'Riordan. I'm a senior manager within the Vialto Partners team based in Reading, right in the middle of the Thames Valley. I've been doing this for good 15 plus years now, so lots of experience with big multinationals, and also all the way down to startups across many sectors. So lots of experience. I particularly work in the business travel remote work team, and then Charles, I'll hand over to you as well to introduce yourself.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. Morning, everybody. I'm Charles. I'm a manager in our business traveller team here, also in the Reading office in the Thames Valley. I've been working in the business travel space for 5 years now, helping clients with their business traveller populations, managing the risks and ensuring that the travel is all compliant for their employees. So great to meet you all this morning.
Thank you. Okay, so just a couple of minutes as to who we are. You might not have heard of Vialto Partners. We're very new. You've probably heard of PwC though. And what we are is the mobility arm of PwC. About 15 months ago, we made the decision as a business to separate from PwC, and we were bought by a PE house, CD&R. For two reasons. Firstly, to move away from audit independence rules. So it's very difficult to provide our services and an audit to the same client. So it just allows us to be more in the market. And then secondly, as well, to get some PE backing for our investment in our technology offerings. You'll see that a lot of what we do is really tech enabled, and it's really enabled us to step away from kind of the restrictions of the Big Four, although we miss our Big Four colleagues. Step away from the restrictions and the need for investment into our business. We can get through the PE backing. So this is who we are. We bring with us all our PwC experience. So you can see the stats on the screen. We cover 98% of the globe via ourselves or third parties that are within the Vialto team. We have 6,000 employees globally. 100 plus of those are business travel experts themselves across the globe. And as you can see from the stats, we are global. We're here kind of anywhere you want to invest. Chances are we can support you in that overseas jurisdiction. So this is who we are. So we've been the best of the Big Four, but also a bit more technology enablement and within the business as well. So market insights, as you might have thought, COVID hit and we all stayed at home. We didn't travel anywhere. We didn't go anywhere, no holidays. But I think it's fair to say it's back with a vengeance. So I'll hand over now to Charles to talk you through how it's come back to us.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. And as you said, we are in a new way of working in a new world right now. Following the pandemic and COVID-19, so from 2020 onwards. So when we're talking about business travel, maybe I start there. What we're talking about here is, as it kind of says on the tin, this is for your employees that are looking to travel outside of the UK and globally, into country, to conduct business on behalf of the organisation. Now, traditionally, this would have been somebody based in their home country, traveling for a short period of time to conduct that business and then returning back to their home country. But what we have seen since COVID is a new way of working. So we've seen individuals now, we've sort of shown and demonstrated in most businesses that we can operate virtually, whether that's from home or actually abroad. And we've kind of seen this new mix of the two, which is what we're calling remote working. So this would be an individual that's requested to work in another country from their normal home location, and they're conducting their work abroad, but their work they essentially would have been doing at home. So it's kind of a hybrid of the two. It's working abroad, but it's doing their work they would have been doing at home. So this is one sort of thing that we've seen since the COVID pandemic that is leading to a new way of working and has actually driven more business travel as a result of this new way of working, the remote work, where individuals may be working in, say, another country, let's say France. They're operating, doing their day-to-day work there, but they then need to connect with their teams, whether that's back in the UK or elsewhere around the world, because they've almost isolated themselves by working in this other country. That's actually driving a lot more business travel. So we're seeing a lot more remote work. And we're also seeing cross-border commuting arrangements, particularly in Europe and Central Europe. You'd have an individual working in one country, but living in a neighboring country, and they're traveling across the border on a regular basis to conduct their day-to-day work. So we're seeing a lot of that cross-border commuting as well. That's driven, particularly as well with Ireland and Northern Ireland. We're seeing that arrangement too. So there's several different ways there that we've seen since COVID of individuals looking to work and employees preferring to conduct their day-to-day operations. We are seeing a rise in business travel as well. So there was a period from 2020 where business travel essentially froze due to the COVID-19 regulations. Travel globally just essentially ground to a halt. But we have seen this has started now to open up as the airports are operating fully now. Businesses are getting back to that normal way of working. In our technologies that we have with our clients, we've seen sort of 500% increase in volumes from the beginning of 2022 to the end of the year, which obviously was driven predominantly that there was not much business travel happening, as we say, from 2020 onwards, but we are really seeing that growth speed up now. Some of the other things that we're seeing since COVID, it's almost been a reset for employees to think about the way they want to work. It's been a reset for employers in how they want to manage business travel and allow their employees to conduct business globally, but it's also allowed the authorities to have a little reset as well. And we are seeing an increase in their ability to share data between the different global authorities. So they are upskilling and they are improving their ability to share that data with each other, which just means that businesses and employees need to be more aware of the compliance obligations that they have because authorities are picking up on this. And actually in today's world, there is more of this increased duty of care. So for the employer to ensure that their employees are having that experience when they are working for business and they're having to travel, that they can do so in the best way possible, that they are compliant, that it is safe, that ultimately it is ultimately necessary. So maybe less excess business travel these days. It's generally pretty essential if individuals are having to travel. And we'll come on to ESG later. So that's something that's really driving the corporate agenda at the moment. It's that environmental, sustainable business travel. Is another thing that we need to be thinking about since COVID-19. Cool. So I think that's kind of just setting the scene and what we're seeing in the current day post-pandemic. When it comes to business travel, we can move to the next slide. There have been some reports just to sort of back up what we're seeing in the industry and seeing in terms of that recovery. There were some reports that were run throughout 2022 that were done by the Global Business Travel Association. And they kind of help to just back up this. So what are we actually seeing and how can we put a number on it? In terms of global business travel spend, that has increased, as you can see there on the screen, by 33.8% from 2021 to 2022. So that's a really big indicator. Businesses are traveling, money is being spent to ensure that businesses are able to operate globally and their individuals are going out, their employees are going out and traveling and conducting business. So the spend is definitely there. I spoke earlier about remote work, how actually there was talk a few years ago that perhaps this was going to replace the need for business travel, where individuals would just go and relocate permanently or semi-permanently. But actually, no, we are seeing that remote work actually requires more business travel to take place. As I said, individuals may be slightly isolated from their home employer and their teams, and they are therefore having to travel more in order to ensure that they are still connected and able to meet up with their clients, suppliers, and colleagues. And then the report from the Global Business Travel Association also did a survey of companies, and actually 96% expected business travel levels to maintain or actually grow in 2023. So businesses are fully expecting now that business travel will be here and it will be continuing to grow going forward. So having spoken there just around sort of setting the scene, what are we seeing? What's the data showing us? We know business travel is back and is going to continue to grow. Why is business travel important, and why is it something that we need to think about as companies and as employers? If we just go to the next slide, please, Sarah. Thank you. There are a number of requirements. So business travel is great, but there are things that the employer needs to think about, compliance requirements that ultimately the employees will need to think about, but ultimately it's the employer's responsibility to have that duty of care to ensure that employees are being able to travel compliantly across the world. What we've got here on the screen is just a range of compliance obligations in some of the key countries. This is just a selection. Each country does obviously have its own legislation, but broadly there's a few key areas that we need to think about when we've got individuals and employees traveling on business. So number one, tax. There are often tax requirements that when individuals are working in certain countries, that often can create an obligation that host country requires tax to be paid on those work days, and that can take the form of, it can influence payroll. So there may be a payroll requirement for the employer to think about in the host location. Do they need to be withholding tax on a real-time basis? Often this can come from day one. And also tax filing requirements. So will the individual, if they've worked so many days in the host location, then there may be a requirement for them to actually file a tax return to report those days. And that can vary. It's not necessarily a given from day one that there's always a requirement, but it can be something that needs to be thought about where we have individuals traveling to certain countries to conduct business. Similar to tax, there's also social security. So where an individual is traveling to another country to conduct their work, there may be a requirement for them to pay social security or equivalent of national insurance in that host location. There are ways around this, and there are often agreements between the home and the host locations that mean that certificates of coverage and certain documentation can be obtained to ensure that the individual is covered and that they can continue to do that work without having to pay social security in the host location. But again, this is just something that needs to be thought about and often can be overseen sometimes when we've got individuals traveling on business. One of the key things that most of us are familiar with is immigration. So where you're trying to cross a border, you often will require some form of documentation. In the most basic form, this could be a passport, but when we're doing work in certain countries, there are sometimes work permissions that are needed and visas to allow us to do that work. Some of the more common ones are well known, sort of an ESTA form to travel into the US. We'll come on to it a bit later, but there is the ETIAS, which is essentially the European equivalent to the ESTA, which is a new concept which is likely to come in from 2024, which will mean that that's another piece of documentation that an individual will need when they're traveling around Europe. So again, we've got tax, social security, and then as well as that is the immigration, so documentation to allow individuals to cross borders to conduct their work. And all of these can come with fines and possible penalties. So it's really important that as employers, we're aware of the business travel that's taking place, and we're comfortable that our employees are traveling to these countries with the right documentation and have done all of their compliance obligations.
And I think you're absolutely right, Charles. You know, penalties, they're expensive. They can get trigger audits into your business. That's a cost for a business, and that's obviously an issue when it comes to tax, social security, etc. But we also need to be mindful of the fact that there can be a personal impact on individuals. If individuals trying to go to a particular country, they don't have the right immigration status, that could be a very unpleasant experience during that trip into that country at the border. And then secondly, that knock-on impact on that individual, having to note on their ESTA, and say, for example, yes, I have been refused entry to a country. Is that ESTA then going to be denied? And that's them not taking their children to Disney World. And that's a real personal impact that we have seen. That's an extreme situation, of course, but it's not impossible. So immigration is absolutely crucial, because that impacts people in their personal lives as well. Next slide.
Yes, please. Brilliant, thank you. And so, as you can see, we've kind of tried to give a few examples there, but broadly, there are the technical considerations that we need to think about when we've got employees traveling cross-border. And you can see those there on the left-hand side of the screen. But there's also some strategic considerations, and we touched on this a little bit earlier in the webinar. Some things that are maybe less of the technical side, but that strategic side. So the employee welfare and experience, so that duty of care of the employer to make sure that your travelers are traveling and they are traveling safely and compliantly. We don't really want employees getting to borders and being told they haven't got the right work permissions and therefore they can't go to attend their meetings or conduct their businesses they were planning. They can have the aggro, if you like, at the border. So if the employer is aware of this business travel, can help and support the employee to ensure they've got the right documentation, that's going to mean that the travel and the work can be conducted efficiently and without any mishaps. And there's also I suppose the ESG, which we'll come on to shortly. We've also got a new term, leisure, which, to be clear, is sort of business and leisure travel mixed in one. So you might have an individual going to work somewhere for a week to conduct some meetings, then looking to extend their stay over the weekend for some personal time. So how is this being tracked? Is the company aware of this? Is it covered by certain insurance? So to come back to that safety, is the company aware of what travel is happening? Does the insurance cover the whole trip? And is it part of an agreed policy with your employees? So often seeing that now post-COVID, individuals looking to travel both for work and pleasure on the same trip. And that brings us on to ESG, a bit of a new topic, Sarah.
Super. Okay, so I think we've all seen a bit of a shift since COVID. I mean, in terms of priorities in our personal lives and also in the corporate world as well. We've seen it at Wimbledon with the Stop Oil protesters. Just recently. So sustainability might seem counterproductive to business travel, but there are ways and means, and it's something to consider when you're looking at your business travel policy and your proposition, and also when you're just expanding into territories overseas. I think it's absolutely crucial to remember this applies to your big employers that have business travel populations and programs, and the smaller businesses or just wanting to expand overseas for the first time. This applies equally to all your customers and your employers, and your employees will want you to be considering ESG on a go-forward basis. So the environmental, typically for most of our clients, we see that business travel is their biggest CO2 production. So it's slightly different if you're in the manufacturing industry, but broadly speaking, across the board, business travel is a significant contributor to the CO2. So what do you do to minimize that? So under the environmental piece of ESG, so you look at providing different alternatives. Do you have to fly? Can you group your travel together? Don't go to Australia 6 times in a year. Go to Australia and tag on a Southeast Asia trip as well, if you can do so. All these policies or these considerations are really important for doing the right thing in the community, in the world, from an environmental perspective. And larger organisations are also having to report on this. So our tools and kit that we offer to our clients, we are starting to not just track business travel for tax, social security perspective, but also report back on CO2 emissions as well. That comes at the agenda. The second piece is the social aspect of business travel. DEI has an important impact here. So, we all try and make the right decisions, but are we inherently biased, for example? So you want to go and set up in a new territory and you think, well, actually, it happens that we have one of our employees from that country. Let's send them. It'll be brilliant. They can go home. They know the language. They know the people. Is that the right thing? Are they only being picked because they're the nationality of that country? What about the person sat next to them who's from somewhere else? Are they being overlooked for an opportunity because they're not from the right background? So it's very clear that we need to make the right decisions from a business perspective and ensuring that we are managing DE&I appropriately. Secondly, if you're wanting to go to some territories, the Middle East, for example, are you going to be wanting to send members of the LGBT plus community to the Middle East that have different principles to this population that we might have in the UK. So really need to make sure that we are sending the right people to the right places and that we're comfortable from a social perspective. And then finally, governance. Depending on where you're sending your people or where you're looking to expand to, this may or may not be so relevant, but bribery and corruption are more prevalent in certain countries than they are we used to in the UK. But also, it doesn't matter if you're going to a different type of country, are you adhering to data protection rules? If you're sending someone with a computer on board, are you taking data with you? Then you're inadvertently breaching data privacy laws because you're taking someone's data out of the country, or you're going against what your policies say. So there's a lot to consider here that's broader than just saying, oh, I'm just going on a trip to meet a potential client. Yeah, you really need to consider all of these different options. But what we don't want to do is to say, here are a load of problems, go away on a sunny Friday morning, or later if you're watching the recorded version, and think, oh my gosh, business travel, this is a pain in the proverbial. We don't want to do it. Let's just avoid it. What we want to try and do is say, right, here are the opportunities and here are the ways we can manage it and turn it into an opportunity rather than a blocker for your business. Charles.
Yeah, I think we've spoken there. There's a lot of exposure and there's risks with business travel and compliance requirements, things to consider. Slightly negative tone, but there are of course benefits of getting this right, and we're trying to demonstrate that here on this slide. So we talk about compliance. Compliance often has penalties and risk of penalties. So if we get this right, if we can manage our business traveler populations, and we'll come on to talk about that in a moment, different ways of doing that. But if we can get a handle on our business travelers, making sure that we know who they are, where they're traveling to, and that they're doing so compliantly, we're obviously going to reduce that risk of any audits, and with audits there could be penalties. So it's a cost saving actually. If we can get this right, we can avoid those compliance issues and often save money via the way of avoiding penalties. And with that, there is also the risk of reputational risk. So if there are audits that are going to be conducted overseas and they don't go well, then the PR from that, we can avoid that. If we're compliant, then we can actually have a good audit and it can be successful, rather than anything negative coming out of that. As I did touch on earlier, we have seen that authorities are sharing data much more between the different countries now. So there's definitely that higher risk that individuals are going to be stopped at borders, and it's going to lead to those possible exposures. So yeah, we definitely need to try and think of it that way and see the positives from that. But maybe one of the more current positive seeing is, as I talked right at the beginning on that remote work and the commuter arrangements, individuals now post-COVID are looking for different ways to work. And when they're looking at their employers and where they want to see their careers going, they're looking for different ways of, I suppose, being motivated and incentivized. And employers that can offer their travellers different ways of working are actually more attractive to employees into the labour market at the moment. So as a business that can say that they are able to manage that business travel, whether that's via remote working, it's actually something that's giving you an advantage over your competitors in the labour market for attracting new talent. So yeah, definitely another benefit that we're seeing in the last sort of year or two. Those employers are getting that publicity out there now that they are able to offer remote working arrangements and that compliant business travel where others can't. So yeah, definitely another benefit there too. Cool. So we've talked about business travel is obviously back and it is growing, and we know now a little bit around why it's important for the business to consider it and make sure that we're capturing it and understanding the risks and dealing with the compliance that arises as a result. But what are the ways of doing that, and how do we help our clients do this, and we do it ourselves in-house here too? Well, there are a number of different ways, and it's often a bit of, we call it here a bit of a business traveler journey. So starting point is often to just understand what the business has in terms of business travel. So it might be you might be an organization that already has business travel, or you're actually looking to expand overseas and need to understand what is the planned business travel going to be. For businesses that maybe don't know, it's a case of actually understanding what business travel is currently taking place. So where do we have travelers going to? How many travelers do we have? How frequently are they traveling? And this can often be data that is actually already held within the business. So many businesses will have a travel booking provider, or may have a method in-house of booking travel. So it's a case of trying to understand, do we have reports that can be provided to us to show us the data and who's traveling to where, and so we can get a hold of our current business traveler population. So that's often the first stage of the process, to just understand the business travel currently taking place or that is planned in future. And then there's a case of trying to understand, okay, so we've got certain travel to certain locations. It's a case of understanding what are the requirements in those host locations for our individuals. What work are they planning on working and doing, and for how long are they traveling for? Because then from that we can understand whether or not we've got any exposures there, and particularly going forward as well, if that's going to continue. As I said, often there's travel management systems in place, but do we know how travelers are going to book their travel? Do we know if we've got any policies within the business already that just establish how long travelers can work in certain countries for? How are they booking travel? What flight classes are they allowed to travel under, etc. So just trying to understand what policies we've got in place at the moment, and what is the process for an individual if they need to go and work abroad for business. What is the process for them doing that? If we can understand this, then we can get that better handle on ensuring that this travel is going to be compliant going forward. One of the common issues we see for businesses is, where does business travel sit? So is it actually a responsibility of the HR team? Is it a responsibility of the payroll teams and the tax teams? Is it a responsibility of the employee, or is it their line manager? It sits across so many different areas within the business. So often we try to work with clients to help them understand where it should sit within the business and who ultimately should be responsible for making sure that business travel is compliant. So we would often advise to just try and have a think about that. If it doesn't already sit with somewhere in the business, which teams might be best placed to understand that? And it can often link in with the policy and what is the process for an individual to book their business travel. Is there approval required? If so, then maybe that team should be involved in ensuring that when they're approving business travel, that it is going to be compliant, for example. And ultimately, once we have that idea of, we understand the business travel that's taking place, we know the process and we know the policies, then it's a case of ensuring that the travel is going to be compliant, so that the right documentation is obtained, individuals have the right work permits, that their social securities and taxes are all in good shape. And that often will fall down to a team in the business. So it's understanding, do we have the current resources and capabilities to be able to manage the business travel risks and then ensure that the travel is compliant? Or do we need to work with third parties to help ensure that can be done as we're being notified of business travel taking place? It's worth mentioning that actually some business travel risks we find can be dealt with retrospectively. So often, if someone's traveled somewhere for business and they need to file a tax return, you don't normally need to file the tax return in advance, and it can be done after the business trip has taken place. However, there are certain risks, such as immigration, where actually we do need to know about this business travel before the trip takes place, because the employee is going to find out that there's a problem as they're trying to enter the country, and it will be too late to deal with that retrospectively. So again, it is part of something to think about when it comes to developing that policy and that process. Just go to the next slide, please, Sarah. Cool, if you click through, thank you. Just have a few bits here popping up. Cool. And as I touched on, this business traveler journey, so it's a case, this is almost summarizing those 6 steps we saw before, but it's a case of assessing the current position and understanding the requirements here we have within the business for business travel, and then coming up with that strategy and constructing a process and policy that we can then implement within the business. And if we can achieve these 4 steps, you should then go from a position where you're unsure of what business travel is happening, and to a place where actually we've got great control around business travel. It's all compliant and it's all known by the business, and employees are ultimately able to conduct their business compliantly and safely. Cool. So I don't know if we've had any questions at all. I think if we go, there should be one more slide there, Sarah.
Sure.
Thank you. See, I'm not sure if there are any questions, Rosie, at all, but if not, then hopefully today's session has been informative and just a taster for food for thought, if you like, for business travel, and whether or not it's covered within the business. Sorry, Rosie, I can see you there.
Hi, Charles. So there's a question around the bleisure concept that you mentioned previously. So if an employee chooses to add additional time onto their trip for leisure purposes, how responsible is the employer for that? You know, if they choose to go bungee jumping and, you know, gets into an accident, what happens then?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, most of our clients we would see is you try to split the travel, so they would be when they're on work time, it is on the employer's responsibility, but if they choose to do something on their own time on the weekends after the trip has happened, then ultimately that would be the employee's responsibility. But it can vary, and it depends on, I suppose, the different insurance that's taken place and the policy that the business decides to implement on what they're going to cover their employees for. But yeah, it's just making sure, I suppose the point we were trying to touch on when we raised it earlier in this webinar was more just being aware that travel could be happening. So making sure that the employees are clear that when they're going on their travel, that they are understanding that which sections are for business and therefore the employer's responsibility. But if they choose to tag on extra trips, that they are aware that that is under their own risk, and just making sure that it's really clear to the employee when they're traveling.
Sure. And we have another question. What needs to be included in a business travel policy?
Yeah, so if you got...
No, go on, no, go on.
Yeah, so I mean, it can vary obviously between companies. Large companies often have a bit more included within that, but broadly it's just to understand, for example, the process. So what is the process for booking? Often clients, we'd like to see in a good business travel policy that employees are all booking travel in a consistent way. So they're not booking it, they may use a travel management company, which if so is great because we know all employees will be booking through one system, or actually if they're booking it through their own way, that they're all expensing it through the right system. When it comes to expenses, that's another part of the policy. So when you're traveling, let's say to the US, what are the rules for certain staff levels to be traveling first class, business class, economy, etc. So that's another part of the policy you may look at. So the expense policy that falls into that. And then the rights to work as well. So as I said, there are compliance requirements with a lot of business travel. And so a way of managing the compliance before it's even the trips have already happened is by having it in the policy. So which countries are we allowing individuals to work from, and what kind of work are they allowed to do there, for how long are they able to work in those countries? So by coming up with a really good business travel policy from the beginning, we can almost help capture the compliance requirements already by making sure it's within policy. Obviously, if people travel outside of policy, then there could be compliance requirements as a part of that, but we know that that's kind of the employees caused that by leaving the policy. So it's kind of helping to just add a bit of a framework to what business travel we want to allow so that we can manage the risks that way. We do have a team that are able to help if anyone's got any questions on developing their policy or wants to check their current policy for how appropriate it is. We do have teams that are able to help support that.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I think that's it in terms of questions. Sarah, Charles, do you have anything to add at all?
Yeah, just want to say thank you ever so much for your time this morning, and really appreciate it. Please do get in touch. This recording will be available. Our contact details are on one of the first slides. So get in touch with us to talk about business travel, of course, but any other wider global mobility issues, remote workers, you find people stranded in various different places, we're here to help you. You know, we work with all companies from all sizes, from startup to big established brands. So please get in touch. We'd love to hear from you and help the Thames Valley expand overseas and bring investment into the UK as well. So thank you ever so much, Rosie.
Right, perfect. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for a really insightful presentation this morning. I have to admit, I did not realise business travel could be so complicated, and I think a few of us will be going back to look at our policies over the next few days. So, I mean, really, it's just for me to say thank you, and thanks to those of you who joined us today. As Sarah noted, there will be a recording of this webinar available on our website. So anything that you want to look back on, revisit, then, please do watch it online. Alternatively, you can either get in touch with Sarah and Charles directly or with me. My contact details are available on the website. And yeah, just to say, this is one of a number of events that we hold throughout the year. We've got a few things coming up over the next few weeks before everyone goes away on their summer holidays. Our next event will be our national and regional economic briefing, which will take place in Reading on the 18th of July. A really fantastic one for finding out a bit more about business sentiment in the region, how everyone thinks things are going. And we've got a great range of speakers from the University of Reading, the British Chambers of Commerce and BDO. Our next key networking session will be over in Abingdon on the 19th of July. Again, we've already got about 50 people signed up for that. So if you want to come along, meet a few new people, potential clients, partners, then, you know, please do sign up for that. And then the Bank of England will be joining us on in August on the 10th. Where they will be giving their latest outlook on the economy, a great opportunity to feedback on what you think's happening and how the Bank of England should be responding. So I think that's all I have to say this morning. I wish you all a very good Friday, enjoy the sunshine and have a great weekend.
Super, thank you very much.
Thanks.